Hey, Noel guys, welcome to the channel. So in this episode, I'm going to run you guys through my process of bodyworking this project goski.
So if you haven't watched the previous videos, I highly recommend going to do that. So then you actually get a little bit more of a rundown of where this panel started and obviously up to the stage there it is now. But I just thought I'd show you guys first that because obviously I've welded a lot of skin on this and stuff, and it's had the usual dings and dents, and yeah, it has sat around for a little while, so it's accumulated a few more little dings and stuff. But basically, I'm not really playing around with a whole lot of material. Like that's right along the weld joint, and as you can see, like yes, there is low spots there, but it's very little. So yeah, like I said, it's not going to be full of bog. You can obviously see that, like I've got nothing to hide. Yep, you can look down it, you can see that it's, looks like a bit like a ball sack. You know what a ball sack looks like. But yeah, I just thought I'd put that out there, show you guys that, and yeah, we'll get stuck into it. Alright, so my first step for this sort of thing, I'd just like to focus on just the areas that have been welded and trying to bring up that area with a little bit of reinforced filler, and I'll show you which one I use later on. But basically, my prep that I use from this epoxy stage here, I'm going to get my red Scotch-Brite, scuff over the whole lot. And there's a reason why I do this. Always go out further than where you actually are going to be applying your filler. So prep up a large area. Alright, so that's looking really good, just with a red Scotch-Brite. And now I'm going to go over it with some 120. Now it's just a little bit of 120, you don't need a whole lot. Basically what my process is, hit it with a red Scotch-Brite. Now this is probably good enough for filler to stick onto with epoxy anyway. But I just find if you go over with the red Scotch-Brite first, it'll hit sort of all those little low spots, all the little divots, that sort of thing. And then if you use a little bit of sandpaper afterwards, that sort of, it puts a little bit more of a heavier scratch in the more higher areas, if that sort of makes sense. So this is just a really light scuff over, just to put a 120 grit scratch in it. We're not looking to break through the epoxy. We're just trying to put a little bit more of a heavier scratch in it. Alright, now that that's done, not sure you can see it in the camera, but you can obviously, this part is sort of a lighter green now. This is obviously the unsanded half, this is the sanded half. Spin it around, see if you can see the difference. So you can visibly see that that's been scuffed up and this hasn't. Now this is ready for a little bit of prep sole, and then we'll start applying our filler. Alright, so this is the filler that I'm going to be using for this stage. It's the Fiberall. I don't go through a whole lot of this stuff. I use it very sparingly, just over welded areas and quarter panel to roof seams, that sort of thing. Anywhere it might need to be a little bit thicker, or I'm just trying to build up sort of a level sort of playing ground over welded areas. So I'm going to go mix some of this up, and then I'll start applying it to the door skin. Now you probably should weigh out your filler, but I've sort of gotten pretty good at just eyeballing out the amount of hardener and stuff that I need, with how much filler I'm mixing up. And yeah, here I am just walking over the job, making sure everything's all consistent. I like to put a nice thin skim just over the top of everything, make sure I work those resin into the actual welded joint itself, and then I'll go over and put a thicker coat on. That way everything's all bonded down. So I probably should have used 80 grit for this one, but I only had 120 at hand. I did have some 40 grit, but I felt like that might have been a little bit too harsh just for the amount of filler that I actually put in, because there wasn't a whole lot on the panel. The 120 sort of cut it down, kind of just focused on getting it flat, didn't really worry about feathering my edges in, because I can do that with the DO, which I do a little bit shortly into the video. Going over it with the roller, making sure everything's all good, no high spots or anything. Going back over it with the block. Must have missed something. Here I am going over with the DA. 120 grit to start off with to sort of blend in all the areas, and then 180 to get rid of any of the heavier scratches. .180 grit soft pad, and then red scotch bright around the edges. Alright, so that's that filler sorted out. Now you might be wondering what I'm doing at this stage. Now, if I haven't already explained it in the time lapse, doing the voiceover thing, I'm going to seal back off this filler and all my bare metal spots and what have you. Basically, from here down, I'll basically just re-prime this. And the reason why, when I get into doing my other filler work, if I break back down into this filler, this will be a lot harder to sand than like the filler that I'll use for the skimming. So, say if I skim all of this, I'm blocking it all down, and then I find a high spot or something, or I break down to this filler. When I try and continue blocking, what's going to happen is this is going to be really hard to block, and the other filler is going to be not so hard to block. So I'm going to take more out of the other filler that I don't want to touch, and this stuff will basically just stay where it is. Because this stuff is pretty hard to sand. I did only have 120 to sand this as well. That's another reason why I went over it with the DA, just because it was a little bit hard. But if I grab my steel roll, you can see that there's no high spots or anything. So yeah, it's not teetering on anything. There is a few little low spots. I know there's one just through here somewhere. It's very minor, but I'm really happy with how that's come about. That's sort of as much filler as I would want in an area like this. And again, not sure if I'll say it in the time lapse or anything, but the reason why I put this filler in is because if there's any small minor porosities in my weld, this will totally seal that off. And when I get to painting the back side of the panel, I'll put a little bit of seam sealer over across the weld joint, and there'll be no issues of moisture or anything sort of festering inside. If there is a small little air pocket sort of in between the welds, not that there really was, because I mean I would have found them if there was any during the blasting stage, but just in case there is very small ones, hopefully this should sort all of that out. So I find with this sort of stuff, just a little bit of air and a clean rag, sort of get rid of any dust and what have you on the panel. If you put prep all over your filler work, you can actually make your filler swell, which can sort of give you a little bit of a false reading, can cause adhesion issues, that sort of thing. So yeah, best not to do that. What's going on with the epoxy? Ended up putting 2 coats on this, but I only showed 1. But yeah, it was basically just sort of medium sort of wet coat, just to seal off that fiberglass filler, locking it all down. So the finish on this filler sort of leaves a little bit to be desired, but the main thing is that I've locked down that fiberglass filler with the epoxy primer. Alright, so our epoxy is now cured. I've scuffed it up with the red Scotch Brite and the 120, cleaned it all off with the prep style. I've masked off my body line because I do not want filler to be going up and over that body line, because I want to make sure that they are where they're supposed to be at this point, especially this one, because that one can obviously get buried pretty easily. This one not so much, but I'm just going to be focusing on just putting filler on this part of the panel. That's all I'm going to be doing now, so bear with me. I'll go mix up some filler and we'll start putting this on. So this 3M filler is not cheap. You definitely do get what you pay for, but it has gone up in price a lot over the years. When I started buying this, it was around $60 a tin, and now it's almost $100 a tin. So yeah, but it is probably one of the best fillers out there.
Now I'm just mixing up the filler, making sure it's all consistent, and then wiping it in. Try and put it in as nicely as possible. It is a little bit difficult when you first start putting filler in, but once you sort of get used to it, you sort of get a little bit more of a feel for it. As you can see, I've had a few years of practice doing it. So now that I've got this half of the door skin skimmed, I can now put a little bit of guide coat on top of this, and I'll start blocking it down. I'll probably start with a little bit of 40 grit, and then I'll work my way down to a little bit of 120. And depending on if I need to reapply some more filler or maybe put another skim over the top, I have noticed there is a few little bits of crap in the filler, like this. But yeah, that's basically just the age of the filler and the hardener and stuff that I've got. Because yeah, I wasn't going to go out and buy all new stuff for this. I am just kind of using what I've got. So yeah, I probably could have put this in a little bit nicer if it was a fresh batch of filler, but again, just working with what I've got for this project. So there it is. So a bit of guide coat going over with the big block with the 40 grit on it. I like to start on the flat areas first and then make my way down to the more detailed areas. So anywhere where it might have a bit of a curve to it or a bit of a reverse curve, that sort of thing. Working my way down with the filler, making sure I don't hit any epoxy. I can see a few areas where there's still guide coat left, but I am still breaking down through near to the epoxy with the green showing through, so I know where to stop and where to apply more filler. Alright, I just thought I'd give you a look at this stage. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, these spots look pretty horrible. They are low in there, no doubt about it, but as you can see, I'm already breaking down to epoxy there, epoxy there, epoxy there. A little bit of epoxy showing there, and I'm actually going back down through to the bare metal just there. So I got to make sure I keep away from that area. I don't want to put any filler there or anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to scuff up all of these dark areas, and then I'm going to put another swipe of filler over it. I will end up putting a little bit more just over these areas as well, and that'll also help fill in some of these 40 grit scratches. So getting two birds stoned at once with that one. But yeah, there's not really much else to say about it. When I get this stuff all filled in and I come back down to the 120 grit stage, these areas here will actually come down again. At this stage, I do not want to continue sanding because I already know I'm down to epoxy in a few areas and in bare metal in that one spot. So I know it's reasonably close, but I know I'm still low here. So, like I said, I'm going to give it one more skim, bring up these areas. These will come down a little bit more, and then we'll be ready for a little bit of primer. All right, I'll have to apologise. I had a bit of a seniors moment and I forgot to hit the record button. So basically what I did with this one was I scuffed up all those low spots, blew it all out, went over it with my rag, blew it out. Did all that, made sure it was clean. Then I actually went over it with the Scotch-Brite again, made sure I definitely got into all those black spots where all the guide coat was. You don't need to get rid of all the guide coat, you just need to make sure it is scuffed up in there. Bog will stick to the guide coat, no dramas. And then when I was actually applying the filler, basically what I did was I swiped it all in those low spots, and then I basically just brought up the rest of the panel to that same sort of level. So hopefully now I should have gotten it all. So basically now the plan is to block it all down as one, and yeah, hopefully there'll be no more low spots. So yeah. So just while that filler is curing off, I decided I'd scuff up the top of the door, getting that ready for a skim of filler as well. And then now that that's done, I can now go on wiping with my 40 grit over the lower half of the door. This section, it's coming up a lot better now that it's got a second skim on it, because I've built it up to a better level now, if that makes sense. So now I can actually start working more into the finer details. You'll learn pretty early on that sanding filler is not really much fun, so try and keep it out of the real detailed areas, anywhere there might be some trim studs or wherever you don't want filler basically. So mask off them, mix up your filler and start laying it on. That section of the door, particularly around the door handle, has got quite a bit of shape to it, so be sure not to put a whole lot of filler in those areas, just put a skim over it, so if there is any little minor ripples and stuff, you can pick them up without having to break down through to the epoxy on that first skim. Just getting the last sort of final wipes in on that filler, trying to make sure it's as smooth as possible. And before the filler dries off, removing that tape because it's not much fun trying to sand tape out of filler. Bit of guide coat on, working with sort of a semi-rigid sort of block. Focusing just on that sort of curved front edge and then working my way around to the more detailed areas around the door handle. So you may notice I put down tape on the body line, and basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to keep that body line as straight as possible, blocking to it and then reversing the tape and then blocking back down to it from the other way of the panel. Alright, so now the filler work's done. That's come up looking pretty good so far, I reckon, but we're going to put some epoxy primer on it now to seal it all up. And then that should probably be it done for today until the next stage. Alright, the epoxy's pretty well tacked off now. As you can see, it's absorbed back into the filler, which is completely normal because that's what filler does. It absorbs things, which is why there's a few areas, like in the door handle pocket for instance, where it's sort of gone that nice sort of smooth look. There's a few other spots through here. That's where I was close down to the epoxy underneath. So the filler wasn't all that thick there, or I'd completely rubbed the filler off. You can see just there. Yeah, just thought I'd make a mention of that. But everything's looking pretty good. I reckon it's, after this is cured, I'll give it a little bit of a scuff up and it'll be ready for the Resto finish poly primer. Sorry if I sound a little bit different, my microphone's on charge at the moment. But anyway, this has had 5 days to cure, so I'm pretty confident that all my shrinking in my epoxy and my body filler would have actually happened by now, so I'm pretty confident that I can just go straight on with this one now. Obviously I've got to prep it all up before I do that. And the product that I'm using, which is this one right here, the Resto Finish Poly Primer, that calls to go over a 120 grit scratch. So I'll have to put a good scratch into this and then obviously get it cleaned up, and then we can start going on with Resto Finish Poly Primer. If you probably won't get 120 grit scratches everywhere, so use your head a little bit. There is a few areas around like these studs and inside the door handle pocket where I had to use a little bit of 180, a little bit of red Scotch Brite, that sort of thing. Like I said, it's only really recommended that you use 120 by the Resto Finish brand, I suppose. But at the end of the day, we're not painting flat panels or just, stuff that has no shape in it. So obviously you have to sort of get in and around these areas. And I find that's probably one of the better ways to do it, sort of go into a little bit more of a finer grit, and that way you're not rubbing through all over the place. Another thing that they mention is to use acetone instead of Prepsol. Now that's not a bad idea, but they also say that the product is direct to metal and all this other crap. So like I've said in the previous videos, I don't recommend using Prepsol on bare metal, and I'd say they're probably in the same boat on that one. But because we're going over the top of epoxy, I Prepsoled the panel and basically skip the acetone stage. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I've done it in the past and it's obviously been no issues. I used the same product on that one. So going to use the same method on this one. Anyway, let's get this stuff mixed up and we'll spray it on. Alright, mixing this stuff up, you got to make sure this stuff is mixed up really well so no chunky bits left on the stick. I did mix this one up a few days earlier, so it wasn't too bad, so I didn't need a whole lot of a stir. And with the hardener, what I did there was the bigger 100ml bottle has little increments on it, so I just poured it out, put 10ml back in there because I was only mixing up 500ml, and then put the 10ml hardener in with my 500ml of the Resto Finish Poly Primer. Alright, we're all suited up, mask on, panel's all clean, ready to go. Going on with our first coat now. So this first coat isn't real heavy, it's basically just to seal off the surface. So don't absolutely bomb it on this first coat, just sort of give it like a bit of a medium wet coat and give it plenty of time to flash off before that second coat too. Now I didn't see much point in filming my second coat, but this is my third and final coat of this stuff. And as you can see, I've slowed right down. I'm putting on a nice heavy coat. I'll put up a little bit of a video just in that top corner of the screen there, and you can see the difference in speed and also how close I am to the panel. So I'm a little bit closer, a little bit slower, really just not overloading the panel with the product, but I am trying to put on a nice thick coat, something that can sort of flatten off and, you know, won't be too hard to sand.
Alright, that's the wrap up for this one, guys. So, as you can see, we've done all the bodywork, sort of giving you a brief sort of rundown through my process to get something like this up to this stage. This is just a display piece, so obviously if I was going to fit this door skin, I wouldn't go to the hassle of bodywork and priming and whatnot. As it sits now, this is basically ready for a rub and paint. I might do a few little touch-ups around these edges, just because I think they look a little bit crap. I probably should have done that when I did bodywork, but I'm going to do them later. Probably end up re-priming this as well, just to basically use up my material, push that stuff to its limits. So yeah, if you liked it, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, comment if you want to know something, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Nice sort of bubble look which is there. I like that. Nice and sexy. Sexy.